is always breathtaking to come back here. We rode from Beaver Creek down, and some of the views, you just look at them transfixed. They are so gorgeous. Then you turn in here, and somebody said Christmas tree lights. No, they're better than Christmas tree lights. The trees. And you just say, I'm in a kind of fairyland here. And just drive around the block again and let me look some more. It's just a terrific place to come to. I thought I would try to get the conversation going by advancing two ideas that I hope will help get us really moving in the energy area. The first idea is the importance of an insurance policy. And the second one is the importance of focusing on things you can do, not in 2050, but in 2014, things you do. These two are connected. Let me start on the first one, based on my own experience. When we were in the mid-'80s, when I was Secretary of State, we became aware that there were a lot of scientists who thought the ozone layer was depleting. There were people who were skeptical. Now we call these people deniers, but anyway, they didn't agree. And it seemed to me that we should do something. How to go about it. And I discussed it with the president. We said, let's take out an insurance policy. Instead of having a big argument with the people who were skeptical, we say, look, everybody agrees if this happened, it will be a catastrophe. You agree on that. So let's all get together and have an insurance policy. So instead of having a fight, we sort of melded people together, and it turned out the insurance policy wasn't that expensive. And also, as it turned out, the scientists who were worried were right. And the Montreal Protocol came along in good time. So I think the insurance policy concept is something that can be helpful right now, because we seem to be on something of a dead center in some ways, as there are people who think climate change is real and it's going to happen, and there are other people who are arguing, and the political environment is fractured that way. So I'm saying, let's go at this a little differently and think about an insurance policy approach. So how would you go about that? Well, I think you start by saying, and I've been working with a little group who's trying to develop this, but they have many examples. But let's make the assumption that the climate is warming. Let's not argue whether it's true or not. Let's just make that assumption. Then what would be the impact of that? And this group I'm working with hasn't finished their study yet, but I think it's pretty apparent that the impact is severe. So if that's so, maybe some of you people who are skeptical ought to take a deep breath and say, maybe we should take out an insurance policy. And instead of fighting about everything all the time, maybe we could compose things a little bit more. So an insurance policy, of course, you have to say, well, what is it? How expensive is it? I don't think it's really even that expensive. It seems to me it consists of sustained, strong support for energy R&D. And if you look at what the federal government is doing now, you can't even find it in the rounding error It's so small relative to the big budget. But a significant amount of money goes a long way there. And it's also true, and I have seen this both at the Stanford and the MIT instance, that when there is a federal commitment that sort of stands for the fact that we're taking this seriously, it attracts private money. And I think it's true in both Stanford and MIT's case, and probably true of other universities too. I'm not informed, but I think the private money is more than the public money. And you like to have the private money around. It consists of people who are experts in commercial. And if you come up with something, these are the people who know how to commercialize it and scale it. So it's a good thing to have that association. So strong support for energy R&D, I think, is really important. Earlier today, I was at a meeting at Stanford on National Academy put on, and we were talking about these issues, and they were worried about how you finance things. And somebody says, well, here's something that doesn't look very profitable, but it would be good to get it financed. Why can't the market do it? I said, are you crazy? Markets don't finance things that don't make sense. Well, then let's let the government do it. I said, are you crazy? That's the way you get in trouble. That's not the way to go about it. But I say, before you start worrying about finance, why don't we create a level playing field so that everybody competes on the same basis? After all, if Stanford is playing Cal, we don't give them 6 downs and we have 3. Got to have a level playing field, or else you don't play. Now, there are some forms of energy that impose costs on society that are not borne by them. So they look less costly than they really are. So somehow you've got to equalize that. And then everything competes on a level playing field. I put it that way because I think Americans kind of like the idea of a level playing field. Americans love sports. And we like to see people compete equally. And there's this sort of a sense of accountability. There you are on the green. You have any greens around here in Colorado? Yeah, you do. We have some great golf courses. Well, there you are on the green. There's the ball. There's the hole. You hold the putter. You can get all the advice you want, but in the end, you hit the ball. And when the ball stops rolling, the result is unambiguous. But it's accountability in a level playing field. So we need to do that. My own nominee for that subject, and I wrote about this with my friend Gary Becker some time ago, is a revenue-neutral carbon tax. People say, let's call it a fee. I say, don't do that. People see through it. It's a tax, so call it a tax. But make it revenue neutral. So the tax mafia get off your back. And it's not a tax, doesn't collect revenue, so it's not a fiscal drag. It's not another way of raising money or something. It's just for the purpose of leveling the playing field. If you did these 2 things, there's some other things. If you did these 2 things, then it seems to me you'd go a long ways in getting yourself ready to have an insurance policy. And they're lying around all over the place. Which brings me to the second idea, namely, let's focus on what you can do. I read about these conferences that 180 or so countries go to, and they sit around for 3 days or 4 days or 5 days in Copenhagen or somewhere. And they get frustrated because they can't solve the world's problems, and they argue about whether you're going to do something in 2050 better than I'm going to do in 2050. Doesn't mean a thing what you're going to do in 2050. Who cares? You can promise anything. Doesn't matter. I'm not against setting an aspiration and then judging yourself, but what matters is what you do. And if you can marry that with the insurance policy concept and encourage the doing, you get somewhere. The governor, I have read, and Fred Krupp here from EDF, I see he is here, and industry people who are working on the fracking have got together and worked on a regulatory arrangement that gets much better control of methane release when you're fracking. And actually, I think it turns out that if you do it well, you actually get some gas that you can sell. So it's not that bad a deal. So that's something you can do today that allows a process to go forward that is making a huge impact, as we all know. It's doing. There are all kinds of things emerging from the R&D process, and we need to be looking at them carefully and evaluating them and try to do things that make them applicable. One of the things that I have thought could be done more, there's stuff going on in a big way, but it could be maybe coordinated a little better and might be helpful. I would go to China. I've worked with the Chinese quite a bit over the years, and I have found that they are people you can really work with, go about it. We go to China and say, look, you are the world's biggest emitter. And we, the United States, are the largest per capita emitter. And you in China particularly know it in spades because you're choking yourselves in all your cities. You don't have to explain that to the Chinese. They know it. They're working on it. So why don't we have a plan together to find things that can be done and then do them. Let's get the intellectual property business straightened out at the beginning. And for goodness sakes, if somebody thinks of something that's really terrific, a person should make a bundle. Fine, who cares? Let them make a bundle. It's all right. It's okay. It's a good incentive. But identify things you can do and start doing them. And if we can do that, then other people will say, hey, something is working. I want in. Fine, come on board. But you get a kind of snowballing effect of doing. And you also get an interactive with the R&D process that's constantly looking and drawing and trying to move things into the point where they move out of the lab and into the field. And more things will emerge from that process. So these are the two ideas that I want to advance to you. And I say this because I think we're on a sort of odd plateau. I've been messing around with this subject since 1969, and I've seen this roller coaster of attention and then goes away and so on. And I think we have much more going on right now than ever before. And I want to see it keep on going. And I'm looking for ways to, we had this big surge. I feel there's a kind of softening now of interest. We've got to rev it back up again. And I think the way to do it is to say to people, okay, the big problem's potentially out there. Let's take out an insurance policy. Let's not argue about whether there is or there isn't. But we can see that if there is, it's a big problem. So let's take out an insurance policy. What is it? It's doing things, taking action, level the playing field, give support for the energy R&D, and then be looking at it all the time to get things and put them into play. And if we have a determined effort in the United States and China together, really collaboratively, and we can get the intellectual property business straightened out. That's not hard, but we can do it. And move forward, then that's a very encouraging moment. and other people will start doing it. In the meantime, the people who are doubting are going to get mugged by reality. Don't worry about it. It's just happening. And but in the meantime, we'll have some momentum coming out of doing things and trying to get people more broadly on board by putting it under the umbrella of an insurance policy. So I hope that was provocative enough to draw a question or two. The end. Neil, there's a question. Tell me who you are before you ask a question.
Secretary Alan Murray. So you're a hero to many people in the Republican Party, and it's almost hard to imagine what the Republican Party would have been like over the last 50 years without your involvement on economic and foreign policy affairs. But if you look at what you were talking about, what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years on public opinion about doing anything on global warming, what you see is sharp decline in Republican support. Democratic views haven't really changed much. It's Republican support. And if you break that apart again, what you see is it's almost all in the half of the party that identifies with the Tea Party. So what do you make of that? I mean, this is your party, the party you've dedicated your life to. How do you change the dynamic of that?
I did not dedicate my life to any political party.
All right.
I have 5 children, 11 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. And I have a fantastic wife. That's what I'm dedicating my life to. But I'll tell you something. These 4 great-grandchildren are something. It's wonderful to have babies around the house again. The oldest is a little over 3, the youngest a little over 1, and you watch these kids. They have so much energy. And life is so exciting. They're curious about everything. You know you couldn't leave a table like this because they'd knock everything off and laugh. So you have to baby-proof your house. But it's exciting, and you say to yourself, what kind of a world are these kids going to inherit? And what can I do to make it a little bit better? Now, as far as the Republican Party is concerned, Alan, I want to call your attention to the fact that the EPA was created by President Nixon, and the Clean Air Act was passed under President Nixon. I know about the EPA because when a new agency is created, there's nobody to speak for them, and they have to get space and people and stuff from other places, and if nobody is speaking for them, they get the worst. So the director of OMB becomes their spokesman. So that was me when the EPA was created. So I helped get it going. Then who did the Montreal Protocol? Ronald Reagan. And who did the cap and trade system that dealt with acid rain? George H.W. Bush. So all of the things that have been done, action, have come about in Republican administrations. Now, I might say, having been involved in some of it, that it was not done at all, in the way things are done today. It was done reaching out. I remember in the Montreal Protocol days, we went to members of Congress. We said, look, here's this problem that's shaping up. Here's the evidence. Here people say that. What do you think? Here's what we think. We think it's a problem. And we worked with people. There's an old saying, you're working with the Congress, if you want me with you in the landing, include me in the takeoff. So instead of campaigning against Congress, we try to work with Congress. And not everybody is on your side at the beginning, and maybe not even in the end. But anyway, you have a sense of collaboration. And that's the way these things were going about. Right now, nobody seems to know how to do that. There's a few little shades of positive. My friend Ernie Moniz is now the Secretary of Energy. And I saw a few of my Republican friends. I said, how's the new secretary doing? Said, oh, he's a good guy. He comes around and talks to us. He listens to us. Wow, big deal. Well, if somebody listens to me, I think he's a pretty good, smart guy, right? And maybe I'll follow him. So that's the way you have to do it. It's a two-way thing. But I think that it's possible the approach I'm advocating here, let's take out an insurance policy, because there are bad things that can happen. And what is the insurance policy? Well, it isn't that expensive. Why don't we get going? And I think that you can get somewhere that way. We have this game changer thing. About, I don't know, 3 years ago, I guess it was, Lynn, we've had 12 or so scientists from MIT came to Hoover at Stanford, and we had the same number of Stanford scientists. And we spent 2 days talking about game changers and people exchanging what they're doing, what they're thinking on various subjects. Then we had a return visit to MIT about a year or so later. And we developed some good thoughts. There's a book, it's about to go to press now, that tries to summarize. And there's a narrative, but there's also little boxes. And the boxes are scientist XYZ did this and did that, and they connected this to that, and all of a sudden, look what happened. And made little descriptions of experiments. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. But we went to Washington, and I asked John Boehner, who I know, I said, John, how about setting up a meeting of our little group with the House Energy Committee? So he set us up with the Republicans on the House Energy Committee. And he came. We went with them for about 3/4 of an hour. And I think, Lynn, maybe you were there? Sally Benson, you were there. Anyway, it was a piece of cake. Energy R&D was an easy sell. They got it, no problem. They go off the rails when you say, well, if we have something and we're trying to get it going, let's have the government go into business and sponsor it. That's when they go off the rails. I go off with them. But if you have energy, you can get support for that if you go about it right. No problem. So I think that there are, I suppose, legitimate questions. People question the science. Models are always troubling to people. Who's plugged in what assumption to a model? I'm impressed with the science, but leave the science aside. We have a guy at Hoover now, wonderful man named Gary Roughhead. He's recently retired Chief of Naval Operations. And we have a little project in the Arctic. And he has a video of the disappearance of sea ice in the Arctic. And it goes along, it's about a 20, 25-year span. It goes along very slowly. And then about 8 or so years ago, there's a discontinuity. It's as though the sea ice is being swallowed. So you've got to look at that and say to yourself, something's happening. This is the first time since the last ice age that a new ocean is being created right there before your eyes. It's not a model, it's not an assumption, it's a reality. And so now people are worrying, Gary is worrying, how do we deal with that reality from the standpoint of all the different kinds of issues that are involved, the emergence of a new ocean, which I might say the U.S. has huge amounts of shoreline, we have a big stake, and why we don't ratify the law of the sea treaty is beyond me, because it would give us lots of advantages. So anyway, don't give up on the Republicans. They're a lot of sensible people, but don't try to con them. Don't try to ignore them. Don't campaign against them constantly. Don't get up and say, I don't care whether they agree with me, I'm going to do it anyway. If there's any way to turn the Congress off, that's it, and create permanent opposition. So you got to figure out how you go about it. And I learned something.
In the back.
Last question.
Where's somebody? There's somebody back there. Yes, okay, stand up. Who are you?
I would stand up, but I got clobbered skiing today, so I can't stand up. My name is Melissa McKeith. I'm from California also, and I love the notion of pragmatism, and I also like to remind people that the word conservative came
Teddy Roosevelt, another Republican.
Yes. So, but my question is this, we're going to frack in California in the San Joaquin Valley, and like you, I have been promoting the idea of bonding or insurance against impacts to water, because we know how valuable water is, both in San Joaquin for agriculture, but generally in California. Do you think that the oil companies would, on their own, without government regulations, without an SB4, agree to bond against remediation impacts from fracking?
Well, bonding is a technique, and it has the advantage of causing the people who are doing the operation to have a stake in doing it right. I think one of the most interesting regulatory regimes around is the one involving our nuclear power industry. The people that own these plants realize that if there's a bad accident in any one of them, they all suffer badly. So they have formed a little regulatory apparatus that's theirs. And they go around to each other's plants and inspect. And these are the guys who know where the bodies are buried. They're the operators. If they see something that isn't right, they be sure that it gets put right. No publicity about it. Another person who's now at Hoover, a wonderful man, is a retired admiral named Jim Ellis. He ran this for a while. So we've been very interested to hear him talk about it. So I thought this is conceptually a model. Bonding helps you with that. But we have another one represented right here that California should pay a lot of attention to. And we get Governor Hickenlooper to come to California and Fred Krupp to come to California and together show us how to think this thing through and be sure we have a regulatory regime that can work. But you're certainly right. If this is going to go, it's got to be done right. And anybody who's involved in a major way will do it. Now, not too long ago, when was it, Fred? About maybe 5 or 6 months ago, we had a major meeting that Fred organized. Fred and I worked on it. And we had all the major companies were there. We talked about this issue, and they realized, just as the nuclear people do, that if something goes badly wrong, it wipes them all out. So they want to have a regime that will work. And they basically are trying to do it right. They don't want somebody who doesn't have much skin in the game and cuts corners to come along and do something wrong. That's everybody's nightmare. So I think that that people who are major players, they want things to be done right so that we don't have a big regulatory upset or a spill of some kind that sets everything back.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's always a delight when you and Charlotte come out to visit with us. And I know that this group here would be happy to go on and ask questions and listen to your response for, another half an hour or an hour. But
I don't have that much to say.
And I think we need to, it's a trade-off. It's a tough trade-off. But I know you like a good meal, too. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to see you tomorrow.